Picture a typical American neighborhood in 1942. Now imagine entire families simply vanishing from these streets, practically overnight. Neighbors watched as entire communities were suddenly emptied out. Families were given only a few days to pack their lives into suitcases, forced to abandon their businesses and sell their homes for pennies. The people disappearing behind closed doors and boarding guarded trains were not spies. They had committed no crimes. They were innocent American citizens. This mass eviction was triggered by the shock of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Almost immediately, widespread suspicion swept across the United States. In the days following the attack, the country's shock began to turn into a demand for immediate action that ignored the legal rights of its own people. That widespread suspicion became law when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This directive granted the military sweeping authority to exclude anyone from designated zones, bypassing the courts entirely. With a single signature in early 1942, the government began removing 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. On the street level, this legal jargon manifested as stark public notices. These civilian exclusion orders provided direct, unavoidable instructions, explicitly targeting people based solely on their ancestry. A government can legally bypass the protections of a democracy by simply labeling a minority group as a military necessity. The physical removal process was systematic. Citizens carried what little they could hold while armed soldiers stood by to oversee their departure. They were loaded onto trains with covered windows. This was a deliberate isolation tactic, erasing these families from the passing country's view. Their destinations were often desolate landscapes. Internees faced a harsh sensory reality, thin wooden barracks offering zero protection from choking dust storms, freezing winters, and burning summers. The true nature of these facilities was inescapable upon arrival. Tall fences of barbed wire and armed sentries surrounded the perimeters. The government often used terms like relocation centers or temporary shelters, but the architecture of guard towers and searchlights proved this was a system of strict confinement. Yet within this environment, the imprisoned citizens actively worked to maintain their dignity. Many cultivated small gardens in the dry dirt. Parents established daily routines to protect their children and simulate normal life. They organized makeshift schools, relying on limited supplies to keep education going. The people classified by the state as dangerous enemies were busy organizing schedules, celebrating birthdays, and building communities behind the fences. Thousands of young men from these very camps even volunteered to leave the barbed wire and fight for the U.S. Army. Their courage on the battlefield, alongside the peaceful lives of their families, exposed the claim of military necessity as a fiction. Years later, formal historical investigations finally sought to uncover the motives driving Executive Order 9066. This diagram shows the drivers of the internment policy. It reveals that racism, public fear, and political pressure carried all the weight, while the evidence for military necessity sat at exactly zero. In 1988, the U.S. government admitted guilt. Through the Civil Liberties Act, it offered an official apology and compensation to the survivors. But the damage was permanent. Homes were already lost, communities were shattered, and an entire generation of childhoods had been shaped by armed guards. Legislation cannot return stolen time, nor can a formal apology easily mend the broken trust between a nation and its citizens. We are left with an unsettling question. How could such a massive violation of rights happen in plain sight? History shows that civil liberties are most fragile at the exact moment society is willing to accept prejudice disguised as national security. The events of 1942 show how easily the weight of public panic can still threaten the protections of the modern justice system. The greatest threats to democratic freedom are rarely hidden conspiracies. They are unjust policies carried out in the open, legally justified by the power of public fear.